Thanks for staying with us here at the Denver Cybersecurity Summit. Now we're going to begin panel 2 on insider threat, one of the largest causes of cybercrime. It is again going to be moderated by Kristin Judge, President and CEO of the Cybercrime Support Network. All right, guys, take it away.
Thank you, Bradford, for the introduction. It's so great to be here talking about insider threat with these amazing panelists. What I'm going to do is have each of them just introduce themselves for a quick minute and tell you who they work with and what they do. And I'd like to start with Brad.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Kristin. My name is Brad Beutlich. I'm the VP of Sales for the Western US and Latin America. So I've got a territory that runs from Alaska to Argentina. So it's quite broad territory. And if you're not familiar with nCipher, nCipher is a company that manufactures a hardware security module, which is a device designed to create and protect cryptographic keys and elements. So that's kind of what we do.
Great, thank you. David.
Hi, I'm David Rudd with Cisco. I am a network security sales professional, and I have been working on behavior-based anomaly detection for the last 15 or 16 years, primarily for enterprise and service provider types of accounts.
Looking forward to learning from you. How about you, Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve Litras. I'm the lead tech evangelist for Cribl. Our main product, Logstream, helps you implement an observability pipeline to route both security and machine data where it has the most value.
Great. And Charles?
Hi, I'm Charles Weatherhead. I'm a principal systems engineer with Code 42. I work with customers in both a pre-sales and a post-sales capacity, helping them with their insider risk as well as their data loss protection programs.
Thank you. And Brance?
Hey, my name is Brance Spradlin. I'm with CyberArk. I'm a pre-sales engineer, been with the company about 4 years, and we cover anything that has to do with privilege. So if you need to talk privileged access, that's what we cover.
So important. It all boils down to that, doesn't it? Thank you, Brance.
Yes,
appreciate it. All right, well, let's get right into the conversation about insider threat. The first question is, how do you identify potential malicious users before there's an attack and then defend against them? And we'll start with David on this one.
Well, that's a very interesting question because of the fact that it's worded, how do you identify the attacker who is an insider before the threat actually manifests itself? So a very complicated question and even more complicated answer. I would, if we're making recommendations here, I think it's imperative that a security organization have a very coordinated and tight relationship with their human resources department. In fact, human resources actually has really interesting data to identify employees that are potentially job-seeking employees that oftentimes can become the conduit for a malicious insider attack. And specifically, there's a concept called a J-score, whereby you're looking for employees. Are they citizen employees, meaning are they happy and content? Are they more of a tourist where, yeah, they're looking for jobs and perhaps, you know, would be willing to leave and perhaps be somebody on the radar that you would have to look at as potentially, you know, stealing customer data when they leave. And then there's you know, the third category, the ones that you probably want to monitor the most closely are called migrants, and they are the folks that are actively seeking to leave the organization. And I think if you, as a security professional, can have access to that type of HR understanding of your employees, you can put in a lot of controls to, you know, be able to monitor and focus your time and attention on those types of employees.
Great suggestions. That's great. And then Brad, would you want to join in on that one too?
Sure, but I actually like, if I can ask David a question about this. You know, I think it's interesting that you bring up the point of being able to kind of measure a person's flight risk, basically. Are there any laws that exist within states that kind of stop someone from being able to gather that type of information from an IT perspective? Because it almost sounds like you're being a little bit
yeah, It's certainly a big brother type of perspective, but what HR organizations do with this data is they look at these figures for job retention purposes, right? So they identify, high value employees and how likely are they to leave the organization. So I'm sure within certain districts, certainly some international districts, that information probably is not available. But how the data is actually pulled, it's actually pulled from publicly available job like LinkedIn profiles and other job-focused types of profile information. And this entity can gather information. So,
so if it's publicly available, it's kind of fair game.
It is, absolutely.
Well, from my perspective, and what we do with nCipher is everything that David talked about, I think is excellent. But one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that you might not catch that one person who's really good at hiding their identity and hiding their intentions. So from our perspective, we take a much more broader view, and we assume that everybody's a threat. And in doing so, we kind of coach companies on protecting as much of their data as possible through encryption technologies or tokenization technologies or data masking technologies or whatever they want to use for that purpose. So it's that way you're kind of covered for all cases of somebody that's kind of an insider threat. I mean, all of us probably saw was last week that it came out first as a Nevada company was potentially infiltrated by a Russian a person that was trying to co-opt an employee for the tune of between $500,000 and $1 million to insert some malware. I know of no system that would really kind of protect a company against that type of threat. And luckily, in this particular case, the engineer, whoever it was, notified the FBI, and it was all kind of closed out. But $500,000 to $1 million,
it's hard to expect someone to walk away from that necessarily. I mean,
So, and that would not have come up in almost any type of analysis, short of being able to look into people's bank accounts. If someone is deeply in debt, maybe then we have to concern ourselves. But you can't do that. Right. So it's tough. So our recommendation is that you put all the systems in place that David's talking about, but you make it such that even if someone falls under the radar, the data is protected and you can't catch it. They don't get it.
Great points. Brance, would you like to join in on this one?
Yeah. That was kind of a great segue in. I was just sitting here thinking about, wouldn't it be great if we had cognitive AI like the movie Minority Report, where we could predict these things before it ever happened, right? I think that would really be great. But until we get to that point, at least from the space I play in, there are a few actual tools that we can do is on top of, vetting out people before we even bring them into the organization. And there's, a lot of our companies out there now provide analytical tools that can look at those user behaviors over time, learn their patterns. Which machines are these users going to, which accounts are they normally using, which machines do they use to gain access maybe to other machines. And then over time, once we see an anomaly happen, what can we do to prevent those actors from potentially doing any type of malicious activity? Can we end those sessions, cut the connections, stop processes, close out an app, things like that? Then we could define, there's tools that define static rules. If this certain activity happens with this user, what kind of risk is involved with that? We can risk score these things, and we could potentially stop any type of malicious activity from happening before it ever really gets started. We end that session because they did this certain thing. So I think that can be a big benefit as well. We can also look at technologies that provide least privilege. So maybe this user that's a potential bad actor in the environment, either internally or externally, maybe doesn't have full admin rights or something to that effect. So there's quite a few things that we could do, to help prevent that.
And then Charles, did you want to round this question out for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, everyone, of course, would love it if, you know, if you have those risk indicators that tell you before an event is going to happen. That's not always the ideal situation that you find yourself in. But I know a lot of companies I work with, they're looking for, you know, that early indicator of, is a user unhappy? They're uploading their resume to job sites. They're uploading sensitive files to personal email, syncing files to unapproved cloud sync apps, things like that. But despite your best efforts, like, stuff is gonna get through. And then it comes down to being able to quickly and easily detect and respond to that when it does happen. So I've seen a lot of different security tools and controls in place, but sometimes it can just take months, depending on the type of investigation that's required, to find out what the heck happened and where did it spread. So the game changer I've especially seen with my customers is getting some historical context, some look back as well, before the event even occurred. So, and that without having to grab the physical endpoint that the user was using or do any kind of like expensive post-incident forensics. So being able to look back 30, 90 days to see what files were leaving the endpoints, and even gaining access to the files themselves to kind of round out that investigation, especially if the user was starting to delete things before they, you know, triggered that incident.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And so I'm going to move to Steve now. Steve, let's say, okay, we did not stop the attack before it happened. Once it has occurred, what do you do to mitigate the damage?
Well, I think I come back to a kind of common theme here, and I think that's, you know, we talked, I think David and Brad talked a lot about the people side, and there were a number of things around tools. I don't know about you guys, but most companies I've been in have far too many tools. You know, they tend to grow over time. They tend to have multiples of them. Nobody ever cleans up after themselves. I think investigations are much more difficult when you have a lot of noise to work through. So I think in addition to looking at the people side, in addition to having the right tooling in place, it's also just good hygiene. It's hygiene around the company. Make sure you shut down apps that don't need to be there anymore. Make sure you shut down systems that don't need to be there anymore. All those things are potential vectors. So while that doesn't necessarily, that's all pre-work, it's not going to necessarily make it easier or allow you to make it easier during the investigation, but having all that noise out there makes it a lot easier to filter through the data and truly see the patterns without all the false positives that tend to come from all the noise.
Good point. Okay, so David, to you, so detecting the malicious threats once they've occurred and then mitigating the damage, what would you like to add there?
Well, I think Steve made some great points there, and I will take it a step further that, you know, implementing a zero trust type of architecture, you know, you're always going to have an insider threat, but, you know, limiting the ability of that person to, you know, access assets that entity should have no ability to connect with can certainly limit the damage and the scope of an insider outbreak. And the specific incident that Brad referenced in his comments would have been a perfect example. You know, had that insider not gone to the FBI, you know, who knows what types of controls that Nevada entity would have had in place if that person had, you know, access to really sensitive manufacturing and machinery plans. You know, that, you know, potentially could have been a huge loss for the company. You know, I know the attackers were seeking, you know, between $4 and $6 million from extorting that entity, right? So that incident potentially could have cost that company, you know, just in the ransom, $4 to $6 million, not to mention all of the cost to clean it up and the investigation. So I think, you know, even though it is implementing and moving forward with a zero trust architecture, which, you know, is not a single tool, but a set of solutions and processes to put in place, is certainly a big endeavor. You know, if you focus on micro segmentation, that's a difficult thing to do and it's costly, but it is, you know, you got to think about what you're trying to, you know, protect the company from. And so, you know, focusing on zero trust is something that I would say, you know, will help limit the actual impact of the insider threat.
Thank you. And then Brad, would you like to add anything to this?
Sure. I also think it's like if you've got really, really important data and that needs to be protected, and let's say it's the design documents and stuff that Dave was talking about, maybe the best way to do that is to, again, encrypt it, but also to have multi people authentication. So I know Bruce works for CyberArk, and they have the ways of having multiple people who have to access the data before they can get to it. So it's not like one person can be co-opted. And studies have shown that, you know, the minute you get to that second or third person, your chances of having that group being co-opted rise exponentially. So it's not hard to co-opt one person. That's actually really, unfortunately, easy in this day and age. But to try and get two people to participate in a crime, which all this is not very easy to do. Which is why, you know, when they want to launch a missile, you've got those two keys that you have to turn. There's a lot of data that within corporations that should be under that kind of multi-company protection. I mean, how many people can access the formula for Coke? You know, Coca-Cola. It's probably, I'll bet you there, it's probably about 10 people that have to all get together.
Exactly.
And are C-level people. So
Great. And
data classification in this particular case is probably pretty important.
thank you. And then Charles, I want to ask you, we were talking on now about those were all the malicious insider threats, people being, you know, bought out by other, you know, criminal organizations. What about the human error side? Because we know that most insider threat probably is just going to be an employee that does something that how do we prevent that?
Well, I mean, you know, we've all heard the buzz term, you know, like the digital transformation and more organizations moving towards cloud-based solutions. And now we find ourselves in COVID and majority of users working from home, and, you know, a lot of solutions, like they're not on VPN, they're not in the office. And so that's causing some complexity into the security team's solutions that they have in place. And so I think that can cause a lot of blind spots. Now, no one in security thinks that they're ever going to completely remove all risk, and thinking that we can completely prevent human error, I think that's just an unattainable goal. I'm definitely not saying that we don't still need our security controls in place, our end user training and so on. Of course, we still need that. And I think the key to handling insider risk is having a broad real-time visibility, and especially combining that signal across like your files that are being moved, coupled with the information on the users that are moving them, as well as intel on how the files are moving, all of that kind of helping give you that signal. And that allows your users then to say like, hey, work the way you want to work, be collaborative, generate the IP that's fueling the business, but you still are not sacrificing your security. You still have that visibility into the files, and you don't have to deal with the complex policies or rules that are kind of like the approach from a traditional security tool mindset.
Thank you, Charles. We have another guest that just joined us, Christofer Sears. Would you please introduce yourself and let us know who you work with?
Well, certainly. Hi, guys. Christofer Sears. I'm an SE here with COFENSE, the Fish Me company. So all things fishing, and I've already enjoyed some of the conversation that we've already been hearing here. So apologies for my tardiness today.
No problem. We're so happy to have you. Thank you. This next question is going to go to Brance. So Brance, what more can be done right now to raise the bar on the level of knowledge employees should have so that they can have safer online behavior?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. So I think probably one thing that's kind of obvious maybe is having a good security awareness program in place. And then kind of tied into that would be, you know, a usage policy within your organization. I think those kind of marry in together. But, you know, those tend to fall flat, I think, along, you know, as time goes along, the longer it's been since you've been through that training or read that policy, things like that, we forget things, right? We're human. Heck, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast last week. So I think consistency with those programs is probably a key point there. And with that being said, though, you know, we can always put tools in place that kind of go hand in hand with that to help control things of, hey, I've got this user that accidentally clicked this email that said, click here for a free meal, things like that. And then there's a lot of those fundamentals. You know, we have VPN clients. I think that was mentioned just a few minutes earlier, especially with us working from home, possibly, you know, still traveling maybe a little bit. But paying attention to the news, reading, keeping up to date on how a lot of these malicious activities and these attacks happen, get involved in social media groups, things like that. And then maybe one other point that comes to mind as I'm rambling on here is, be aware of social engineering. I think this is a huge thing these days. Be careful about what you're saying and where and who you're saying it to. So don't give out your information would be another key point in my world.
Thank you. Brad, did you want to join in on this?
Yeah, one of the things I've seen some very successful companies that have a concerted security marketing group. I mean, literally, their titles are security marketing, and they put up posters. And the thing that makes them different is they explain to the users why they're implementing certain aspects of their security profile. So many times, companies go out and they implement something related to security. They say this is a security issue. They don't specify exactly why they're doing it. And if you can explain and communicate to the customers why something is being done, and maybe it's a little less convenient, but it's so important, the user base will comply. It's kind of like, you remember the old, I'm not old enough to remember World War II, but I've seen the posters that say, like loose lips sink ships, and putting things up like that around a company gets the people involved in the security, gets them to understand why they're doing some things. And I think that's very successful, and we kind of forget to do that.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve. Yeah.
So I think that's a really good point. I also think with COVID, we have a lot of people who are managing networks at their houses now who don't know how to manage networks, right? That if they understand the why a little bit better, they're probably going to start taking a little bit better care of their own home network, which is a vector for all this stuff as well. So I think the why is a really, really important piece of not only getting them to participate, but getting them to really buy in and go beyond participation, really kind of spearhead things.
Yep. Exactly. One of the things I find is if you say that the cyber hygiene I'm teaching you at work also helps with you and your family at home, then people say, oh, okay, I want to learn something about it at home too, and it makes it more relevant. So Christofer, I'd love to have you just jump in a little bit. We were talking about how do you identify these malicious attacks, insider threat, or the incidental insider threat.
Yep.
Just talk to us a little bit about some of your thoughts on, in general, insider threat.
Oh, I appreciate that opportunity. So what I've seen in the past is exactly what they were just mentioning. You got to make it personal. You got to incentivize people. And sometimes you can do that through just having your high quality security awareness training, but always tie it back to home. People will have a stronger, hey, what you're doing here guarding being a good corporate citizen, guarding your organization, hey, they're doing the same thing against you for your US bank account. That's one of the avenues. And then whenever it comes to insider threat, I'm deeply passionate about building insider threat programs. And actually, there's a whole presentation on the stages of it. But it all starts with, and you guys are probably plenty well familiar with this, but it starts with stakeholders. It starts with building those bridges with parts of the organization that a lot of security professionals might not always be comfortable with. I won't go through the whole thing here, but when you think about it, you're going to have some partners across the whole organization to even begin the conversation of insider threat. It'll include physical security, it'll include HR, it'll include finance, it'll include a lot of those organizations that you're probably not terribly familiar with, or that you might only view as an internal customer. So those are a couple of my thoughts on it, but yeah, strong security awareness program that makes it fun, makes it personal. I mean, silly thing, no joke, I've had customers actually ask for fish for the people that have been successful at phishing campaigns.
That's great.
We'll take it. If that's what customers want, it makes them happy and it gets it personal.
Exactly.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And it's something memorable compared to a PowerPoint. Yeah, it's got to make it memorable. That's a great point. So I'm gonna send this one back to Brance here. So how does your organization improve security on the endpoints though, without impacting the operational efficiencies? You have business units who are your customers too. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, so when we talk about locking down the endpoint and making it secure and not impacting operational efficiency, that can get a little tricky, right? Because we kind of have that quadrant of we're super secure, but people are very aggravated because we're so locked down they can't do anything. So we need to look for some type of tool that will provide that happy medium of where we're secure, but our users are able to do their job, and we can make it seamless to the users. They don't even know this potential policies and tools are in place, providing that privilege or allowing that app to run. So there are tools out there that will allow this to happen and make it very, very seamless. So,
Thank you.
and when we talk about, least privilege, we're talking about removing users out of those administrative groups, and then only providing policies that allow this user or set of users to run that app that requires elevation when they need it. So we can do that and provide just-in-time elevation as well.
Thank you. I know we touched on this a little bit, but Charles, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into now. We have this whole new issue that folks like you are facing, and I wouldn't want to trade seats with you at all. We've got the work from home issue now. So how is that impacting the security decisions around insider threat?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a huge uptick in companies, as even very large organizations I'm talking to, where they're making a very big push for zero trust, and scrambling to find alternatives to solutions that they had previously been using that were requiring VPN, and so they're needing to be more flexible with their end users, and really SaaS-based security solutions. Giving you that real-time detection, while that balance that I think all of us are trying to speak to, that balance of letting your users still do their job and be collaborative while still giving you the security you need.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody else want to talk about work from home and what they're seeing?
I'll comment on one of them.
Go ahead.
Great.
Thank you, David.
Go ahead.
Go
So
ahead, Christopher.
we've seen the same thing here, from the phishing side of the house, where the attackers are well aware that we're all working from home, and every single URL that they're trying for is dynamic in nature, they're polymorphic in nature, and they're probably going to a totally legitimate Azure site or AWS site. Now, you security professionals, your proxies would have blocked that, your firewalls could have potentially blocked that, but if you don't have the GPOs in the system, or obviously with Macs you'd have to enforce it through other means, to force your users back onto the VPN, which of course is a whole nother issue to try to deal with the processing on that side of it, you're going to leave yourselves open. And that's some of those small little nuances where the attackers are adapting moment by moment to the field that they have available now. David, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good segue. I was just going to say, this is a machine scale problem, right? And if we're trying to use legacy human scale abilities to detect it, it just won't work. So, whether or not you're working from home or whether or not you're back at the office, you first, as Charles had said initially, you have to have visibility. You have to have telemetry data to see how the business is actually operating, right? And now that you've got people coming in alternative manners, that just increases the need, but also increases the complexity of how do you get that telemetry data, and then applying machine scale, machine learning and applying analytics to be able to, identify that activity as it's occurring is, now even more important. And it'll be interesting. The insider threat has always been an asymmetric threat, and, you have to approach it from that perspective. Insider threats aren't as common. True malicious insider threats aren't as common as an attacker going outside in, but they have the potential to be a lot more impactful financially to the organization, right? And
good point.
Insider threat programs have always been underfunded in companies, right? And now that 70% of their workforce is working from home, there's new vectors that you have to be aware of. So some time and attention focused on that would be
hopefully
important.
that will bring people around to paying attention to it more. Brad, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, and the other thing about the insider threat is they're now facilitating external access. So that's the other thing that's kind of annoying, is that they're coming in and they might be introducing malware that's going to allow another group of people to come in and access the data. I mean, that's the thing people have to understand, that a lot of these hackers, they work in groups. They're like armies. They've got the advanced team, they've got the military, they've got the subterfuge. I mean, they've got all these different people whose responsibilities and jobs fall into different areas, and that's where their specialties are. And I can still go back to, one of the best things you can do is assume that the attackers are going to get into your network, and you've got to protect through encryption methods or tokenization methods the data you don't want them to get, because they'll find their way in.
Yeah, thank you. Steve, I want to ask you, we talked a little bit about, keeping logs. How long, because of insider threat, should someone hold on to their data when they have to investigate?
As long as you can is my stock answer to that. The hard part about that is, if you look at things like our SIMs, our log management systems, they're rather expensive to run. And not even just the software, but all the infrastructure you need to keep in place to retain data there. Really, companies need to start to evolve their data management philosophy in this area. It's something we work with our customers on, but if I can, if you look at, I think it was Ponemon Institute a couple of years ago came up with a report that said that the average time from detection of incident or from occurrence of incident to detection was 197 days. So if you have a year's worth of data, okay, you might be covered, but we've all heard of breaches that have been, taken much longer than that. Think of Marriott at 4 years. I think it was Old Dominion at 9 years. I mean, these, the longer you can have data around, the better. But at the same time, you need to manage that. It's always a trade-off between risk and cost, right? So, if you can look at things like, well, can we create summarized or metadata that will help us get there, that we can keep around in perpetuity when we have to get rid of the rest? I think all of the above are, things that need to be addressed in a given org.
Thank you. Charles, I'm sure there's people that are listening that don't have an insider threat program yet in their company. Can you give some suggestions on what they should do just to get started?
Yeah, I think one of the main things I like to call out is assume positive intent and try to build in partnership to the center of the program. So I think a lot of security organizations are still trying to have that mindset of catching the nefarious end user and instructing their employees to watch all their other, the other employees, and that can just build a divide and not be conducive to the company culture. So I think being transparent from the very beginning, fill your users in on what you're doing, what you're watching, build the relationship with them, and in return, ask for their support in helping to protect the company. And then as you're building out your training, invite your employees to engage with the security team if they have questions about, what data they can move, what apps they can use, and so on. I think I love it when our security team reaches out to us all the time, and they're just like, hey, saw that you created this public link to this document, and I'm sure it was a valid reason, but do you still need it open? And it's just a friendly reminder. They're not like flashing a light in your face and saying you did something wrong. Assume positive intent, I think, just goes a long way.
That's nice. And Brad, you wanted to follow up on what Steve was talking about?
Yeah, really quick. Steve brought up a very good point about the 197 days, but what people don't get is that's one person. If you've got 10 people that are in that same group for 197 days, that's 5 years. So that's something people just, when they hear that statistic, they don't extrapolate it to the group. And if it's a nation state, let's say it's North Korea, where they might throw 100 people at a particular breach. That's 197 days with 100 people working actively. It's a lot of time.
Great point. Brance, I'm going to come to you next. So another question, how can an organization ensure that credential boundaries and the credentials are only being used for what they're intended?
Yeah, so I think one of the first things you probably need to have in place is, defining what the roles of the people within your organization are and what those roles need to have access to. So once we have that, then we can start looking at, okay, this particular role needs to go out and touch these accounts or these assets, and we can put methodologies and procedures and policies in place, whether that's just an intangible policy or a tangible policy, like we're actually applying a policy on technology to only allow this credential to go out to this set of assets. And I always use a real basic type use case example here of, we don't want the domain administrators accounts going out and touching, you know, an endpoint to do help desk troubleshooting or something like that. So let's put controls in place to where those domain administrators, those root accounts, et cetera, are only staying within the tier 0 and not, you know, traversing down. So
great point. I wish we had another 10 hours. We could keep going here, but I want to make sure that the audience knows that you can now go over, if you want to talk to any of these wonderful experts, you can go to their booth and continue the conversation and drill down a little bit more. But we have a few minutes left. I want to make sure that we give everybody a chance to say, what's your parting words? What would you like to leave everybody with as it relates to insider threat? And we'll start with David.
All right. So going back to my favorite thing to talk about is the very recent attack on that Nevada entity that Brad originally brought up. One particularly interesting, fascinating detail of that was that the adversary had planned to use DDoS to create a smokescreen to sort of cover up the insider's actual activities. And I've been talking about that for the last 12 years, that DDoS is often used as that smokescreen. And when the security team sees a DDoS, they need to really double down and understand that often, you know, even if it's only 10% of the time, it's used as a way to camouflage the actual, you know, the financial loss of data to your organization. And so I feel like DDoS needs to be part of an insider threat discussion.
Good point. Christofer, last parting words?
Yeah, you know, whenever it comes to insider threats, I think you need to have a certain level of trust. We have technology all over the world, and we have great technology. A lot of us represent phenomenal technology. But one of the things that we believe here at COFENSE is you gotta trust your humans too. You gotta leverage the human mind who can smell something that's a little suspicious. Give them channels in which they can communicate directly to your teams and leverage them. I'd rather have 100 misses and 1 hit than let it go by and not give them a voice at all. So again, that's my 2 cents on that, along with everything else that the other gentlemen have said in regards to training. Continuous.
Part of culture.
Make it your culture, make it continuous, make it a game.
Great. Steve, parting words.
Yeah, I would just kind of echo the culture counts, practices count. It's a lot of block and tackling. We're talking about a lot of kind of higher end stuff, but a lot of it is just the standard practice of your normal IT hygiene, your everybody's own security hygiene, and just the practices that we do on a day-to-day basis.
Great, thank you. And Brad? I think you're on mute.
My take on the insider threat is very similar to the outsider threat. Assume that you're going to get breached. Assume that you've got an employee that's going rogue, and assume that you're not going to figure it out until after the fact. So protect yourself by encrypting or somehow protecting your important data. And then when you go to that extent, make sure you don't do this, which is putting your crypto keys under the mat within your organization, which is akin to putting them in software. Get your keys out from under the mat and put them into a hardware device. And that's what we do. Come by our booth, we'll talk about it.
Thank you. Charles?
Yeah, I think, and I'm being repetitive, but I feel like really assuming positive intent with your security awareness programs and building that partnership with your employees, let them be collaborative, but then you still have like a SaaS-based solution, especially in this time where everyone's just over a public internet connection, where you can still get that real-time detection, that visibility into the data movement, and then putting in place a right-size response. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all response for every single incident.
Thank you. And Brance?
Yeah, it's really hard to add on top of what was already said there, but I would definitely say awareness, the culture, best practices, keep up to date on what's going on out in the wild. And I will say, I guess my closing words will be protect your credentials. And if you need to talk about that, come see me.
So great to hear so much agreement around this. So it was a great discussion. Thank you again to the Cybersecurity Summit for having this event. And thank you, gentlemen, for a great panel. And we'll end it there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Stay safe out there.
Take care.